Hello. Um, so normally I do mostly 3D printing stuff on my channel. Um, However, I'm actually a big Magic the Gathering fan, and so I have a lot of decks I've kind of worked on, some with the help on the internet, and some with, basically I've kind of just taken my own direction. And so one deck I really want to talk about that I haven't really seen online in terms of EDH, just in terms of a concept, is Princess Yue. And so I'll just go ahead and go over the deck tech real quick and just show you how it works. And of course, I'll have a link into the Architect to kind of showcase it. But I'll kind of just go over the cards that are in the deck in different categories in terms of clones, draw, focus cards, enchantments, lands, sort of mass disruption, ramp cards, targeted disruption cards, right? Your counterspells, etc. Your blinks, tokens, and then Wincons. And with that, I'll go right into it. Okay, so Princess Yue, right? If you don't know what her ability does, basically, she's a legendary creature, 2 colorless, 1 blue, human noble ally. When she dies, if she's a non-land creature, return this land to the battlefield tapped under your control, and she becomes a land named Moon. And of note here, right, the reminder text states that she's still a legendary, which means that um, basically the lands or the moons that kind of are created as a result of either herself or one of the clones becoming a land uh, aren't legendary as far as I understand. So due to the layers rule, right, as though if you are kind of familiar with UA and kind of how the function works, basically it'll just kind of take the clone's text, copy it over, turn it into a land as per UA's text, and then finally give it the abilities to tap for 1 colorless and tap for 2 scry. So, which means so much to say that you can have multiple of said moon clone lands on the field at once. So that being said, right, I'll kind of go into some of the creatures. So that kind of works as basically you want to have Princess Yue on the field, right? This is just kind of like a little reminder card. All right, so first off, okay, so starting off with the clones themselves, right? So Blade of Shared Souls, you have this out on the battlefield, right? And basically, so much to say that whenever it equips onto something, that creature that it's equipped to becomes a clone of UA. So it might be really useful, for instance, in the case where you might have to have something like one of your other clones copy something like a bigger threat on the battlefield, and you want to turn into UA later on, right? And so all you have to do is just bam, it gives you some flexibility, in terms of after the play effect, because you can just equip it and have that creature become UA, die to Legends rule, and then turn into a colorless moon. So follow that up with Chameleon, Master of Disguise, right? So um, if you need to discard cards, right, it's got Mayhem. It gives you a little flexibility. It's a 4-mana clone, which is about, the normal curve for a lot of clone cards in this deck. But this is probably one of the weaker choices. So if you want to swap out Chameleon for someone else, you can feel free to do so. But just, good clone goodness there. Clever Impersonator. Big thing with this one, right? You can have some really kooky stuff because Clever Impersonator can enter the battlefield as a copy of a non-land permanent, right? And so that means that you don't have to just select creatures. You can select artifacts as well. And so, you can select your own artifacts. For instance, something that I'll bring up later on in the deck is a Nuka-Cola machine. So imagine having a Nuka-Cola machine as a land, right? And so if you're playing in a pod that doesn't run land destruction, you'll have a Nuka-Cola machine and a land version of it, which means your land kind of doubles. So as well as if you've got something else on the battlefield that's pretty good, another artifact like maybe a Thran Dynamo or something like that you want to copy, you can do that as well. So just gives you some more flexibility there. Clone, right? Doesn't really needs no introduction. Can copy any creature on the battlefield. Pretty effective. Glasspool Mimic, right? So benefits here, right? It's only 2 colorless and a mana, and you can flip it and play it for land if you need land for some reason, if you're getting land screwed. So gives you some flexibility there. Lithiform Engine, right? So really good for just kind of copying any instants or sorceries that you might want to double up on. or target, activated or triggered effects, right? That includes abilities that are already on a creature, right? So if you've got something that's already a land with an ability that you want to duplicate, right? Lift the formation will give you that flexibility. So it's just more flexibility in terms of what you want to choose and when to copy. Mirror Hall Mimic, right? So any creature on the battlefield. And the nice thing is to, right, you can cast it from the graveyard for its disturb cost, which is a reminder, right? So you can create tokens. Let's see, probably not as useful if you cast it as a transformed version, because those tokens are legendary and so they'll die and kind of fizz out. So probably better if you want to enchant something else that's already on the battlefield besides Princess Yue. Um, so something to consider. Phantasmal Image, right? And so nice thing here. So it's got when it gains when this ability becomes target of a spell or ability, sacrifice it, right? People aren't really gonna target lands that often, unless they've got stuff like bounce lands or target or whatever, right? But I think a lot of your lands get affected by that anyway. So the big benefit here is just lands aren't really typically designed in a lot of people's decks on the whole to be targeted just for the sake of being targeted. And so it's 2 mana, pretty cheap clone that you can cheat out and kind of take advantage of that way. Phyrexian Metamorph, big thing here, right? Same thing as the Clever Impersonator, right? You can target an artifact or creature. So pretty effective there. Gives you more flexibility. Sakashima of 1,000 Faces. So this one's kind of useful because let's say you have Sakashima on the field at the same time as Princess Yue. So clones of Princess Yue won't die immediately. So it kind of helps you, basically lets you keep playing clones and makes chump blockers so that when they die on blocking something, then they'll actually trigger at that point. So this just kind of gives you the added benefit of just giving you chump blockers before it automatically turns into a land. Sakashima's Will. So, you can take a creature or an opponent's creature, right? So that's always goodness. And then, let's say you've got some other creatures, right, that you had the right off the bat copy. Now, what this lets you do is basically and you didn't get a chance to turn it into a colorless moon, then you can play the Sakashima as well and turn any existing creatures minus 2 tokens into copies of Princess Yue. So helpful there. Shadow Kiln. I'm kind of excited about this card in this deck because it's a 3 colorless, 1 blue shapeshifter with flash that basically at the beginning of your upkeep, each player mills 3 cards. You may exile a creature card from among the cards milled this way. If you do, Shadow Kiln becomes a copy of that card, except it has this ability. So, just kind of gives you some additional utility. So it kind of gets into a little bit of the weeds, but to my understanding, right? So I think you can target one of your own clones if you mill a clone and then choose to copy Princess Yue, and then it'll die to Legends rule, but still keep this ability. And then it'll continue to persist with the effect of having everyone mill 3. And then continue to get some utility and then update that colorless land with the clone text in that way. You can just keep grabbing any of the 12, assuming there's 3 other players still on the board, any of those 12 cards that are milled, and then get that creature's ability and then put it on there. Sorry, I was trying to remember how this would interact with this deck in the long run. Some of these are a little bit convoluted. Sublime Epiphany, right? So great because you can choose multiple to choose 1 or more, right? Counterspell, target activate ability and triggered. Return every non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Great because your focus is mostly lands and special lands, right? Colorless, clone text lands. You can also draw a card, make a token. So just overall goodness here. A lot of utility, and it fits this deck, I feel. Ever-flowing well. So enters the battlefield, mills 2 cards, draw 2 cards. So 8 cards in your graveyard, probably gonna happen pretty quickly here. So whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by the Myriad Pools, up to 1 under target permanent you control becomes a copy of that spell until end of turn. So gives you a lot of flexibility there. Vizier of Many Faces, right? So just another 4, you know, 2 colors, 2 blue clone with some flexibility there in terms of you can have it be, you know, have it become embalmed, or just play it outright. So again, another one, if you have another clone card in mind that you like to swap out, you can swap this one out. It's really no different in terms of function and form for the deck as the Chameleon, but just adds more clones to the deck. Wall of Stolen Identity. Okay, this one's a fun one because let's say you play this as a Princess Yue, right? Not counting the first time you tap Princess Yue, right? So you'll tap Princess Yue the first time it comes in, right? But it'll die to Legend's Rule and come back, which means that it no longer is linked to Princess Yue. And so once it comes in as a land, then you can copy another creature that's on the battlefield that's a big threat, and it's not allowed to be untapped because it's persistently a land unless somebody bounces that land in question, right? So really powerful card there in this deck because it's just kind of persistent, basically removal. So the only thing they can really do with that guy is maybe just sack it if they have sack outlets. But if they're running like a Voltron or something like that, it's pretty devastating to just kind of shut down the threat if there's one big threat on the board. And then Wax and Shape Thief, again, really effective because artifact or creature you control. It's artifact creature only you control, but still gives you some flexibility, like I mentioned, Nuka-Cola or something else to that degree. All right, so now going to some of the draw cards. Right, Consult the Stars. Kind of in a pseudo sense, is it like a tutor, right? So, you know, let's say you have 5 or 6 cards in your library, which is the number of lands you control. You can put one of those in your hand, or you can kick it and then grab 2 cards. So kind of like a draw / selective tutor engine thing. So pretty good there. Cosima kind of gets additional benefit, right? The longer you can hold out, you know, it's basically a landfall blue, which isn't too common, right, in terms of in blue. But, you know, gains whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. If Cosima is exiled, you may put a voyage counter on it. So basically, so to say, let's say you put a land, right? That's 1 counter. You put a clone, you target UA, dies, right? And then comes in, then now it becomes a land, enters the battlefield under your control, so now you get 2. So basically you get 2 every turn, and you can choose to trigger that whenever you need to. So, if you play it 1 turn, right, you get 2 triggers, you wait to the next turn, you get 4, wait to the next one, you get 6. So at some point you'll want to, kick that off. But if you want to just go ahead and shoot, let's say at 4, then it's 4 card draw after, 2 turns, which I think is pretty good. Defiler of Dreams, right? So a lot of the utility of some of these cards, it comes from basically you having it on the field already, allowing the clone Colorless Moon to target that card. And so the big thing here, right, you want to pay attention to is whenever you cast a blue permanent spell, draw a card as a persistent effect on a land, right? Pretty good there. And then you can also, let's see, additional cost to cast blue permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. So also helps kind of ramp in a bit. So it's a little bit of card draw, a little bit of ramp. Fairy Mastermind, right? Pretty good card there. Draws their second card, you turn, you draw a card. So really helpful if you're playing like, another black or blue player or something like that. Fallow Sage, right? So whenever Fallow Sage becomes tapped, you may draw a card. Pretty simple stuff here. You've got it's a land, right? So it's got the modifier. you tap it because you're tapping it for mana. It's tapped. The effect triggers. I mean, it's it's pretty cut and dry. Pretty powerful stuff. And you don't have to, if you're full on cards, right? Like it's a May. So if you're at 7 cards and you need to wait to burn it down, then there you go. You can just wait as well. Finale of Revelation. So this one's pretty good because let's say you're in a situation where you have a lot of cards in hand, and you have 10 mana for a combination of your own lands, your blues, your colorless moons, and maybe some chargers or something from some of the other cards that are produced by late. I'll talk about in a bit. You pay the 10, you'll draw 10 cards, untap 5 lands, so you get a little bit of return there, and then you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game, which is pretty good because I think if you get a lot of these cloned and into your colorless moon section, and kind of build up pretty quickly. So let's see, Gulfsea Pilfer, right? So you tap it for land, and then on your upkeep, right, it becomes untapped. You can pay 2 for land, or pay 2 to draw a card. Pretty good as well. If an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than a hand, right, from exile or whatever, draw a card. So pretty good stuff there. The discarded card obviously doesn't really matter because it's not a creature when it's a land anymore. So just really pay attention to the first 2 ones there. Matoya, Archon Elder. Whenever you scry or surveil, draw a card. All of these have scry abilities, right, in addition to the tapping for 1 colorless. So pretty good stuff there. Seer Sundial. It's a colorless landfall. You've got 2 lands potentially coming in every turn. So as long as you've got the mana, you can continue to draw cards. So pretty useful card to give blue landfall in a sense. Silent Hall Creeper. Right, and so this is kind of like a just in general. So it's not designed to be cloned. It's just card draw in general, right? So you can draw a card, put 2 counters on it, and then become a copy of target creature you control. So basically, having on the field, right? If you want to deal some damage, right, you put some counters. It's beefed up. Then do some damage, beefed up, draw a card. And then finally, you get a little more utility, basically, by on the 3rd and final swing. It copies Princess Yue and then turns into a colorless land. So basically, for 2 mana, right, 1 colorless, 1 blue, you get a 1/1. You get 1/1 damage in. You get 3/3 damage in a blockable, and you get to draw a card. And then you get an extra colorless land at the end of it, which is pretty nice, all for 2 mana. So pretty great card in this deck. Tuayanla, right? So whenever it becomes tapped, draw a card. You'll do that normally, drawing it for mana, and then whenever it becomes tapped, put a +1/+1 counter on them. If you want to add some more stuff that adds, takes advantage of counters, you can do that as well. But I think this is another one where just using it for that first ability alone is pretty useful. All right, so let's go into some of the targeted disruption, right? So your counterspells, things like that, your flickers, your blinks. Archmage's charm, counterspell, you can draw 2 cards, or gain control of target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 1 or less. So utility, gives you options, always good. Counterbalance, this one's fun. I think I'm a big fan of this card because it's kind of like a little bit more diplomatic. And so, let's say you want to you pull something from the top of your deck, right? It would be 2 mana, 3 mana, or whatever, right? So opponent plays something, you can choose whether or not you want to counter it. You kind of politic it a little bit with the deck. It's 2 mana, so it's basically recurring counter spells. But it's May, so you don't have to. So you don't have to automatically become a threat in that case. So, but there's also a little bit of a chance, which I think when things are kind of left to chance, right? Because you don't know what the next card at the top of your library is going to be mana wise, and so. I think it's a little bit of utility, a little bit of chance. So it just helps you also throttle the player that's kind of, going off and becoming a threat quickly. And so this one's kind of just a personal favorite of mine. Counterspell, the Nizo introduction. Great in all blues. 2 mana. Done deal. Deadeye Navigator, right? And so Soulbound, right? You have that come in. You have it Soulbound to Princess Yue. And now guess what? If you have a clone and target this, right, then becomes a land, right? And so that colorless land, that clone that has Deadeye Navigator's text on it, right, then allows you to basically soul pair to Princess Yue, and so all you have to do now, right, is tap it for, or you pay uh uh one colorless, one blue, right? Exile this creature and then return to the battlefield under your control. But it's not a land, so to my understanding, right, I think this persists because it's a land, not a creature, and you can just keep exiling Princess Yue. So I'll have to recheck it. I'm pretty sure even if this doesn't work out as a colorless land because Soulbound requires it to be a creature, you can still have it on the field, right, and just flicker Princess Yue as a, if it gets targeted. So just gives it some protection. Let's see. Ghostly Flicker, right? So you can blink something that's about to get targeted, right? And so more importantly, right, land or Princess Yue, so just gives you the ability there, protection from stuff that targets it or one of your lands, right? So pretty helpful there. Glen Elendra Archmage, right? Pretty powerful stuff because it has Persist. So because it says Persist when it comes in, right? Colorless land. So you have the clone, right? The clone comes in, copies Glen Elendra Archmage, right? And so now you've got that text on there. And then you sack it, right? And so I believe that because it's a land, it doesn't really matter that it's got those -1/-1 counters on it because it's a land. So whenever you sack lands with persist on them, it doesn't really do anything, which means that you can just keep getting free counter target non-creature spells for 1 blue, which is pretty powerful. Okay, Hullbreaker's Horror, right? If you have that on the battlefield, clone comes in, right? That's going to be a pretty devastating card to have to deal with if they can't deal with the Hullbreaker Horror once it's on the battlefield in time for you to basically put this down and get a clone down to copy it to turn it into a land. Because, as a reminder, right, whenever you cast a spell, choose up to 1, you can return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand, and return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So pretty annoying to have to deal with in a land version. Malevolent Hermit, right? So you can sack it, right? It's a counter spell, and then comes back in. And then, as a reminder, this guy on the backside, non-creature spells you control can't be countered. So pretty useful there. Rewind, good instant, right? You can counter spell, and then if you have the mana for it, it's basically just a free counter spell. The only thing it costs you is just 1 card slot in your hand. Pretty useful there. Royal Elemental. All right, so this one's another showstopper if you can get a clone on it. So it's got a landfall trigger, which this deck loves landfall triggers. There's not that many. I wish there was more blue landfall for this deck to take advantage of in this color down in terms of colorless or blue, but this is one of the more powerful ones. So whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may gain control of target creature for as long as you control Royal Elemental. Well, as long as you have that land, right, that's going to be on there, which means that you play a clone, you're going to be able to copy something. You play your land for turn, you're going to be able to copy something. So, bam, pretty useful there. Spell Swindle, it's a good counter spell, but also a good ramp card. So if you counter a big 6 mana, 7 mana, 8 mana, then this gives you a little bit of ROE because like the higher the mana cost, the more treasures you're going to get out of Spell Swindle. So big fan of this card, especially in this deck. As a more of a control-y kind of, take your time until you can play it, kind of lean into more of the Wincons. Spider Sense, right? And so it's got web slinging, and then just, it's a good target and counter target instant sorcerer triggered ability. Pretty cheap, pretty useful. And then finally Surge Spanner, right? So it's a land, becomes tapped, you can pay 1 colorless, 1 blue, and if you do pay, then you can return target permanent to its owner's hand. So again, just a bounce, a persistent bounce that's on the battlefield that they can't get rid of since it's not a creature anymore that easily. So pretty useful there. All right, this one's really quick. Tokens. So I opted to put in Gate to the Afterlife and God Pharaoh's Gift. So this is kind of like mid game, right? Let's say you have a few creatures in your graveyard, right? So Gate to the Afterlife basically puts cards in your graveyard, right? And then just is able to kind of create copies, right? Um, of those exiled cards. So it just kind of makes chump blockers, um, and gives you some utility there. Um, Homunculus Horde, right? So whenever you draw your second card each turn, which is probably pretty likely in this deck with all the draw spells and so on that you'll have on the field, create a copy, create a token that's copied as creature. So pretty good there for those that are familiar with Horde. And then the Deer Kraken, you can pay one. Again, if you take advantage of the counters, right, with the Tulian Law, if you have something that you can use to move those counters off of lands, you know, um, sorry about that. I had a phone call. Yeah, so Nadir Kraken, right? So, um, yeah. Again, take advantage of those counters. Um, if you could somehow work an earth bending on this would be pretty useful. Unfortunately, that's green, so you can't really take advantage of that. So, but there's other strategies you'd like to use. Yeah, feel free to add, tweak this deck as you need to. Take advantage of Nadir Kraken and Tulian Law. But again, right, you can make chump blockers for one colorless, which you'll probably have a lot of mana running this deck, so pretty useful there. All right, your ramp cards, Cage Sun, um, so gives you you can, if you have a specific enchantment or something, already creating tokens like zombies or whatever, right, from the God Pharaoh's Gift, or tentacles from the Deer Kraken. You can give it a +1/+1, and then whenever a land's ability causes you to add one or more mana to the chosen color, add one additional mana, so just ramps your blue. So just instead of tapping for one, you'll tap for two. So pretty good stuff right there. Mass Polymorph, right? And so this is pretty good because it's kind of a ramp in the way that, let's say you have a bunch of tokens on the field, right? And you want to turn all those tokens into creatures, the next, 6 or 7 or 8 creatures, which are probably going to be clones. A lot of them will be clones. Then this gives you a lot of ramp to put a lot of clones on the field. Just kind of, targeting, using those tokens as like fodder, right? You just turn them into basically clone cascade. So this is a really fun card if you can pop that off with enough tokens on the board. Moonlit Meditation, right? Some flexibility there, right? So you can target the Nuka-Cola that you've got in your deck here, right? And so, um, and then it'll just basically make you extra treasures, um, you know, or foods, etc. As you need for life gain. So, as well, there's other stuff in the staking target. It just gives you flexibility in terms of creating, um, you know, extra tokens as you need, depending on what the situation on the battlefield calls for. And a Nuka-Cola vending machine, pretty solid in this. Gives you a little bit of extra ramp, right? Outside of just playing more clones to get more colorless moons. And then gives you also the food tokens, right? So it helps keep your life up if you're getting, pinged, by burn effects or whatever. Here's another highlighted deck, Planetarium of Wang Shi Tong. And the reason I say it's a highlight is because think about it this way, right? Let's say you've got, 1, 2, 3 colorless moons, right? And you want to leave those, up for Wen Xing Tong, right? And so on your turn, let's say you use Princess Yue to scry because you're probably not going to swing out. So you'll just, so she's already got the scry ability on there, so she can do it as she's on the battlefield. You'll scry. You'll use Planetary Wen Xing Tong. You can basically cast the top card of your library without paying its mana cost. And you can do it once per turn. Not your turn. It's each turn. Which means, guess what? If you have 3 of these bad boys, your second opponent, your third opponent, your fourth opponent comes back, untaps, right? You basically get to take full advantage of this card. This is a very devastating card. And if you can clone it with like a Clever Impersonator or Waxen or something else, right? And you get that as a land. Oh, just it's you'll instantly become a threat. Sapphire Medallion, always good in blue, right? Just reduces it 1 mana. Sky Diamond, right? 2 colorless, tapped, tap it for mana, easy. And then everyone's favorite Soul Ring. All right, so Infinite Reflection, right? And so whenever it enters the battlefield attached to a creature, each non-token creature you control becomes a copy of that creature, right? So again, if you have some other stuff on the battlefield, right, that you want to turn into Princess Yue, and you can get that going real quick. You just put that on Princess Yue, and they'll turn into her right off the bat. And then non-token creatures you control enter the battlefield as a copy of enchanted creature. So easy because, right? I mean, you can turn anything that's in here that's a creature. I don't think there are many creatures in here that there's a handful, but whatever creatures you play, right, that come in that don't have a clone ability on them, then they'll just turn into Princess Yue, and then they'll kind of carry that text. So pretty helpful there. And then Propaganda, just to kind of help throttle some of the creatures, right? Let's say you're playing against a tokens deck or something, it'll help throttle that. Clone Legion, right? And so this is kind of helpful to get, let's say, a bunch of chump blockers, or or let's say they've got like a big scary threat on the field, then this kind of helps you get like some sort of AA Kraken or something, and this kind of helps you out and kind of is in theme, right? So kind of helps get helps you ramp in a sense, depending on what the situation is on the battlefield. If someone's got a Voltron, some stacked up creature that creates a lot of tokens, right? And so Clone Legion comes in, you just make a bunch of copies of the one. Coastal Breach, right? And so you'll probably be casting this every time for 4 mana because it's got Undaunted. So in Commander, that's always going to be, unless people die. And you play this later on, right? Let's say you have 3 opponents, so it costs 4 mana, easy. And then you can return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands, or you'll return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. It's pretty good because, again, right, you care about what? The stuff that's in your land section. You don't really care about anything that's up front in your creature section. So really good there. Evacuation, same thing. Return all creatures to their owner's hands, right? You could probably also put an Aetherize in there. Jin Cataxis, right? This is a pretty powerful card. Counters, counters whenever a creature plays something, right? Only happens once per turn, but still pretty annoying to deal with in as a land, right? And then you can copy whenever you cast an artifact, instant sorcery, so pretty good there. Season of Weaving, right? And so gives you the flexibility, right? You can draw 5 cards, combination of that, or you can do like choose an artifact creature you control, make a token that's a copy of it, right? Or return each non-land non-token permanent to its owner's hand. So you probably want to do that in this case, right? Just as a way to bounce stuff while still getting, let's say 2 cards from it. So pretty good there. Gives you some flexibility. And then finally, some of the Wincons, right? Some of the stuff that once you've gotten the field, right, you'll probably lead to a win pretty quickly. So you get your Jace, right? So if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead, right? And so that's pretty helpful. You say you stay live long enough, right? You can draw enough cards, draw yourself out, and there you go, boom. So Lighthouse Chronologist, right? So again, this as a clone, right? This will keep those abilities on there, and you can level it up as a land. And basically, at the beginning of each end step, if it's not your turn, take an extra turn. I mean, I don't need to tell you, right? Like if you're going every other turn, so you second opponent, you third opponent, you fourth opponent, you'll kind of ramp pretty quickly there. And I can't see how you could lose, in that sense. Be it through just making through so many tokens, right, from your token generators, or taking an advantage, right? I've had games where I've cloned a Skewed Swarm, right, and I'm able to keep landfall triggering, and a lot of the reason it's kind of hard to talk about this deck, I would feel, is because um, you don't know what's going to be on the battlefield. So some of these cards that are in here, you don't necessarily have to target the stuff that you play on the field. You can also target your opponents, and so that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of, oh, let me copy this green player's landfall effects like Skewed Swarm, right? Well, now you're a threat to deal with because you've got an unkillable Skewed Swarm, because it's a land. You get that effect, right? And now you're blue with also green cards landfall triggers in a deck that plays basically at least 2 lands every turn. And then you combine that with the Lighthouse Chronologist, and now you're going every other turn. You're having an extra turn. I mean, pretty powerful right there. Platinum Angel. If I don't know, I mean, it'd be criminal if they can let you get away with this. But you get this on the field, and then you clone that, becomes a land. You now have a land that basically says you can't lose the game and your opponents can't win the game. I mean, unless they're running like a boiling seas or some sort of land sorcery or whatever, land destruction, right? Like that's going to be pretty tough to deal with. And finally, Triskaidekaphile, right? This is probably one of the more clear-cut ones. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you have exactly 13 cards in your hand, you win the game. You combine that, right, with your finale of Revelation, right? You got a lot of cards draw. I was also considering putting in actually, I do have a Reliquary Tower in here. So you got a Reliquary Tower in here, right? You combine it with the Lighthouse Chronologist and maybe the Platinum Angel, right? And so eventually you'll be able to get this on the field. And if you're able, get a clone on it and then make it become a land. And then all you have to do is just wait until you hit an upkeep where you have 13 and then you win. And then just going over the lands real quick, right? So Deserted Temple, you can untap target land. You'll be tapping a lot of stuff. So let's say you want to take advantage of the scry, right? Early on, let's say you have a planetary, but you only have maybe one or two, colorless moons. Is a good way to just untap your colorless moons and take advantage of the scrying for planetary or other things you may need. I've got 26 islands in here. And then finally, let's see, last few cards here. Mysterized Village, the next spell you cast this turn can't be countered. That's pretty good, right? You're blue, you want to protect those clones, right? Or, so let's say you put on a Hullbreaker, right? And then you put on a clone, and then they're like, oh crap, he's going to do, a combo here, right? Mysterized Village just gives you that insurance, like, oh, like, you can't actually counter it. You're going to have to do a removal. And if you don't have a removal, then it's, it's going to resolve. Myriad Landscape, just more ramp, right? And, that's pretty helpful, especially in a deck, right, that, likes landfall triggers. If you can especially target something on the field with landfall triggers. Mystic Sanctuary, right? So you can put target instant sorcery from your graveyard on top of your library. Just gives you some recursion. Good stuff, right? Another Season of Weaving, or let's say you want another board wipe or whatever, or bounce all the creatures because there's too many again. So gives you some recursion there. Reliquary Tower, hand size, right? Helpful for Tiscadel feel. Sunken Citadel, just gives you ramp. And then Thespian Stage, right? So comes copy target land. So pretty good, right? We care about what lands in this deck. So Urza's Cave, a little bit more of an expensive ramp, right? But still gives you ramp card, right? And so big thing to note here, right? It's not like Myriad Landscape where it's basics. Do I have that right? Is it? Yeah. So yeah, it's basics. Whereas Urza's Cave, you can target the Thespian Stage, and if there's a card you want to, to land tutors. So if you have something you want to copy, right, twice with Thespian Stage, and you kind of use this as like a little ramp or tutor. And then Vesuva, yeah. So same thing, comes in, copies. Pretty helpful. So that's the deck. Sorry about the long-winded speech, but hopefully it's kind of helpful in terms of visualizing how this deck can be a lot of fun at your pod. Let's see. On Architect, using TCG prices, it says this deck cost me about $230. That sounds about right. It's Like, it's a core 2, it says. I mean, I think it's pretty balanced, right? It's fun, right? And it's a slow burner, but it's very kind of control-y, landfall-y focused. You know, but also it's a lot of fun because you can it's every game is different because you're cloning not just stuff that you want to play, but you're also cloning stuff that's on the battlefield. And you never know what kind of kooky, um, combination you'll have in terms of skewed swarm or something else, right? That gives you landfall, right? That just ramps you up. um so I hate to play with this deck in a landfall, against a landfall deck. Because this thing's just gonna go to town. So hopefully that helps. Hope you enjoyed the video. And yeah, let me know in the comments if you decide to give Princess UA a try. Thanks.